To create gender equitable spaces in the early years, I think is really about having an understanding firstly about what a gender equitable space is. So creating an awareness and an understanding about what it means to have a gender lens and to think about the ways that gender has an impact on everybody, but particularly for the early years on children. So thinking about how that impacts on every aspect of their life, from the activities that they enjoy doing, who they want to play with, what clothes they want to wear. So the work is really just about opening the options up for children and saying that any colour of clothing or any style of clothing is available to them, any activity that they want to play with, that there aren't girls' activities and boys' activities and that there's no opportunity to cross over in between those. So the early years are already thinking in so many different ways about the work that they can be doing to challenge harmful and limiting gender stereotypes and roles. There's some fantastic work going on in some centres where this is an issue that they are looking at and that they're aware of. And this ranges across a whole range of settings within an early childhood space. So that can mean the actual physical space is examined and looked at for how are spaces and play areas set up, what visual imagery is around the centre, what messages I suppose does that send to children, what are those images depicting and who are they depicting. Centres are already thinking about book lists and again, even within books, there's a wide range of work that can happen just with books and thinking about stories, whether it's whose story is being told in those books or what the actual story is about, what's the storyline. Centres are also thinking about, those that are already thinking about how to do this work, is about the language, I suppose, that they're using. Communication is a really important aspect of undertaking gender equity work, and that's again across a whole range of different scenarios, whether it's how staff communicate and demonstrate respectful and equal relationships amongst themselves and model that for the children, but also how do they speak to and communicate with the children themselves. So things like really focusing on a young girl's appearance is something that really comes from quite a gender stereotypical place of the importance of appearance for young girls. Commenting on, oh, don't you look so pretty today? No, that's a beautiful dress, where did you get that? Whereas it's sort of a different set of questions that we would hope are being asked are more based on the skills and the attributes of young people as opposed to what they're wearing or what they look like. And language, I suppose, about what's excused in some forms of behaviour, particularly around sort of aggressive masculinities that might be starting to form, and notions of boys will be boys, and how does that get trivialised or excused within different scenarios or settings is also something that needs to be considered for this work. So I'm from a women's health organisation, and the best way that I've found to work with early childhood spaces is firstly through partnerships with local government in the first instance, and particularly local governments that have a role in providing early childhood spaces. But then the work that we've then undertaken with early years educators and people who work in the early years space has really come from a place of firstly acknowledging the expertise and the skills and the knowledge that they bring to their role. They're the experts in how they work with children. We come as experts in how gender has an impact on society, and it's about sort of, I suppose, marrying those two skill sets and thinking about how does this play out in an early years space. What are the skills and the knowledge and the ways of working that we can value add to the practice that's already going on in early childhood? How can we build on the strengths and the fantastic work that is already occurring and work with them to maybe identify the areas within centres that this work can be progressed even further. I think local government has a crucial role, particularly local governments that either provide services themselves or, I suppose, lease out spaces for early childhood operators to utilise, and thinking about the myriad of ways that they can be of assistance, be of support, link early childhood centres into other work that's occurring in the gender equity or the prevention of violence against women space, and being a real value add to that as opposed to you're doing it wrong sort of approach is not going to be very useful. So by putting a gender lens on, that really is sort of spending some time either through training or through reflective practice to think about what are your current views around how gender has an impact on the world. What training or education have you received in that area? Is that something you need to maybe seek some additional support for? Because it really, so often we talk about the fact that once you see how gender plays out and impacts the world we live in for both women and men, for boys and girls, it's really hard to unsee that. It's also really important to acknowledge that a huge piece of this work is how young children interrelate and react and relate to each other, and how their relationships are beginning to form. Who do they want to play with? Who are they encouraged to play with? And that is a huge area of particularly thinking about respectful relationships and gender equitable relationships. Examining power dynamics in play and who is sort of having power in different situations, and how does that play out in terms of who gets to use what spaces in a centre, and how does that play out. But it's really important to acknowledge that addressing that and working on that and trying to make changes in that is a huge undertaking, and it's not easy work. What we know from the evidence is that early years as a site or as a setting for prevention of violence against women work is crucial. Prevention work is committed to working across the lifespan or taking a life course approach. Therefore, obviously, the early years is one of those settings, and it's about ensuring that the messages that we want people to receive around respectful relationships and gender equity and gender equality need to be reinforced throughout our lifetime. So it's about starting with the early years and ensuring that children aren't limited by traditional notions of gender stereotypes and what it means to be a girl or a boy. This is all about creating a series of building blocks so that throughout our life we understand what respectful relationships mean and what living in a gender equitable and gender equal society is all about, in order to prevent violence against women and violence against a whole range of other people in our community as well.